Welcome learners, and today's lesson is about addition and subtraction of common fractions, where we are going to be focusing on some practice and application questions. So let's go ahead with our lesson. We have different cases where the denominator is the same, where the denominator is not the same, and where we are working with a whole number with a common fraction. We're also going to be working with improper fractions where we are going to need to simplify them, right? So we have here as the first practice question, 5/2 plus 2/3. So because we are working with halves and thirds, we need to make sure that we get them to the same denominator, because right now they are not the same denominator. How do we do this? We need to find the lowest common multiple. So if we are looking at 2 and we're looking at 3, what is the lowest common multiple between 2 and 3? If you are thinking of 6, then you are absolutely correct. Good for you. So how are we going to change this denominator 2 so that it becomes a 6? We do that by multiplying by 3. Please take note, we will not change the denominator by adding or subtracting something from it. We need to change it by using multiples, and multiples are used with multiplication. So because we've multiplied by 3 with the denominator, so that we keep the value of that common fraction, we are going to multiply the numerator as well by 3. We are going to add this to the 2/3. Again, as a denominator, we have that 3. How do I change it so that it becomes a denominator of 6? Yes, we are going to multiply the denominator by 2, because 3 multiplied by 2 will give us that required LCM of 6. What I do with the denominator, so that we don't change the value of the common fraction, we need to go and do exactly the same thing with the numerator. This has now changed our common fractions to 15/6, and we are adding 4/6. So when we say change, we've only changed the way it appears, but the value is still the same. If I take 15/6 and I simplify it, my answer will be 5/2. So what is 15/6 plus 4/6? We are going to add the numerators, and we are going to keep the denominator because we are working with sixths, and that is going to give us a total of 19/6, and that is 19 divided by 6. Do you remember what we call this type of fraction? This is an improper fraction. Do you remember why we call it an improper fraction? This is because the numerator is bigger than the denominator. But we cannot leave it like this. We have to simplify it. So how are we going to simplify it? Let's look at that 19 and whether we can now separate it into 2 common fractions. If we say 18/6 plus 1/6. Why am I saying 18/6? Because I know that if I say 18 divided by 6, or I know that 18/6 actually give me a whole number of 3. And we have that 1/6 there, and if I add these two, this is going to be 3 wholes and 1/6. Let's continue to another example. So this time we are subtracting. So I am subtracting 3/4 minus 2/3. So we're subtracting 2/3 from 3/4. But again, because we are working with quarters and thirds, we need to get them to be the same denominator. So how do we do that? We are going to look for the lowest common multiple between 4 and 3. Do you know what that is? You are correct. It is 12. So we need to get both of these numbers to have a denominator of 12. And we are going to do this by multiplying our denominator 4 by 3. And if we're going to multiply by 3 in the denominator, we are going to do the same thing for the numerator. Again, with the 2/3, we are going to multiply the denominator by 4. Why am I multiplying by 4? Because I have to have that denominator 12, which is the lowest common multiple. And what we do with the denominator, to keep the value of the common fraction, we must do the same thing with the numerator. This gives us a 9/12 minus 8/12. But now we are working with just 12s, which makes our calculation easier. So what is 9/12 minus 8/12? That gives us 1/12. And that is our final answer. Let's move on to the next one. Now we have a whole number with a common fraction. And when we have a whole number with a common fraction, the first thing we need to do is to change the whole number to a fraction. Do you remember how to do that? That reminds us of the properties of 1. So if I am going to change the 2 to a fraction, I am just going to divide it by 1, because 1 does not change, dividing by 1 does not change the value of our whole number. So now we have 2 1s plus 2/3. Again, the denominator is not the same. So how am I going to get it to be the same? I am going to find the lowest common multiple. And in this case, it is our 3. So how am I going to get the denominator 1 to a 3? I'm going to multiply by 3 with the denominator, multiply by 3 with the numerator as well. With our second fraction, common fraction, we don't need to do anything because the denominator is already a 3. So what does that give us? That gives us 6/3, which is equals to 2, and we are adding this to 2/3. Or we are adding it with 2/3. So 6/3 plus 2/3, that will give us in total 8/3. There we are again having an improper fraction. How am I going to simplify this improper fraction? Again, I need to think of the multiples of 3. How can I split it so that I have a whole number and a common fraction? So this is going to be 6/3 plus 2/3. Why did I choose 6? It's because it is part of the multiples of 3. I now know that 6/3 is going to give me a whole number. So if I say 6 divided by 3, that is just going to give me a whole number 2, and that is going to be 2 plus 2/3. Now, if you notice, this is exactly where we started, meaning if I have a whole number and I am adding a common fraction, then I can just now write them together as 2 and 2/3. And that is our answer for that expression. Let's look at a last example here for the practice questions. We have here 3/4 minus 5. So take note again, the 5 is a whole number, and how am I going to work with that? I need to change it into a fraction. The best way of doing that is to divide it by 1 so that you don't change the value. That is still 5 wholes or 5 ones. Then next we are going to find the lowest common multiple, and in this case between 4 and 1. The lowest common multiple between those two numbers is 4. So after we find the lowest common multiple, we need to get them to a common denominator. So what are we going to do? Because the first fraction there is already a denominator 4. So we are going to leave that fraction as it is. But with the whole number that has been changed into a fraction, we need to multiply the denominator by 4. And if I multiply the denominator by 4, I need to multiply the numerator by 4 so that we keep the value of that fraction. Now we have 3/4 minus 20 quarters. So 3/4 minus 20/4, we do know how to subtract bigger numbers from smaller numbers. Firstly, we know that our answer is going to be negative. And after that, I'm just going to subtract the natural numbers. So that is going to give me a negative 17. Now I have a negative 17/4 as my answer. Again, this is an improper fraction. So how do we change it? So I'm going to think of the multiples of 4, and the first one that comes to mind is 16. So 16/4, that is negative 16/4 plus a negative 1/4. Now they are both negative because they come from a negative improper fraction. And what is that going to give us? Now negative 16 divided by 4 gives us a whole number 4, which is a negative 4. And when we add that negative quarter, that will give us a negative 4 and 1/4. And that would be our final answer there. Let's quickly go to an ad break and then we'll see you just now.